Michael Kendrick felt the weight of the day melting off his shoulders as he approached his apartment door. 3 months in New York had been an adjustment from his quiet life in Toronto, but he was finally finding his rhythm in the bustling metropolis. The luxury high-rise in Manhattan's Upper East Side was everything he had hoped for. Elegant, well-maintained, and with a view of Central Park that still took his breath away every morning. His fingers brushed against something foreign as he reached for his keys. An official-looking piece of paper had been taped to his door, its bold red lettering instantly sending a chill down his spine. Eviction notice. Michael blinked twice, certain he was misreading it. He was never late with rent. In fact, he paid 3 months in advance when he moved in. "Ah, perfect timing," a voice called from down the hallway. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Vincent Hargrove, the building's property manager, strolled toward him with the confidence of a Wall Street trader who'd just closed a record deal. His tailored suit barely contained his ego as he gestured to the notice. "I'm afraid we're terminating your lease agreement, effective immediately. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." Michael cleared his throat softly. "There must be some mistake. My lease isn't up for another 9 months, and I've never missed a payment." Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No mistake. Change of building policy. We're upgrading all units in this section and increasing the rental threshold. Nothing personal, just business." "I see," Michael replied, his Canadian accent more pronounced with stress. "But legally, you can't just—" "Look," Vincent cut him off, "I'm actually doing you a favor by giving you 3 days. Most people," he emphasized with air quotes, "would be out by tomorrow. But hey, I figured, you being all polite and Canadian and whatnot, I'd cut you some slack." Michael noticed Mrs. Abernathy, his elderly neighbor, watching nervously from her partially opened door. A young couple from 14B stood by the elevators pretending not to listen. "I understand you have procedures," Michael began diplomatically, "but perhaps we could discuss alternatives." Vincent snorted. "Alternatives? That's cute. Listen, bud, better start packing. Your politeness doesn't buy extra square footage in Manhattan." He tapped the eviction notice with his manicured finger, his smirk widening. "Better start packing, bud." Michael carefully removed the notice from his door, examining it with the practiced eye of someone who paid attention to details. "This doesn't appear to follow New York tenant law. There's no cause listed, no case number, and certainly not enough notice for a non-violation eviction." Vincent rolled his eyes dramatically, checking his watch as if Michael was wasting his valuable time. "Well, would you look at that? The Canadian knows American law now." He chuckled, leaning against the wall. "Listen, Professor, I've been managing prime New York real estate for 15 years. I know every loophole in the book." More doors had cracked open along the hallway. The residents of the 14th floor were now an audience to the confrontation. Some exchanged knowing glances. They'd seen Vincent's tactics before. "I'm simply pointing out that this notice wouldn't hold up in housing court," Michael continued, his voice steady despite the tremor of anger he felt building inside. "The rent stabilization laws in this district specifically protect against arbitrary— Jesus, you people really don't get it, do you?" Vincent pushed himself off the wall, stepping uncomfortably close to Michael. "This isn't some quaint little neighborhood in Toronto where everybody apologizes and drinks maple syrup together. This is New York. People like you get eaten alive here." The hallway fell silent. Mrs. Abernathy clutched her cardigan tighter. The couple by the elevator exchanged uncomfortable glances. Vincent lowered his voice to a near whisper. "Look, I've got 3 finance guys willing to pay double what you're paying. The owner wants maximum returns. You're just collateral damage." He shrugged as if this explained everything. "Nothing personal." Michael noticed Marcus, the doorman who'd always greeted him with genuine warmth, standing near the emergency exit. The man quickly averted his gaze when Michael caught his eye, but not before Michael saw something there. A mixture of pity and, was that anticipation? "Can I at least speak with the owner directly?" Michael asked, maintaining his composure. Vincent barked out a laugh. The owner? That's hilarious. The owner is an investment group that wouldn't waste 2 seconds on your sob story. I speak for them. And I'm speaking now. He tapped his watch. Tick-tock, maple leaf. 71 hours and counting. Michael studied the man's face. The smug satisfaction. The absolute certainty that he held all the cards. 15 years of pushing people around had made Vincent dangerously overconfident. With deliberate calmness, Michael pulled out his phone and dialed a number. What now? Calling your mommy? Vincent sneered. Michael waited. As the line connected. Hey, it's me. We have a problem. Vincent's patience wore visibly thinner as Michael finished his brief phone call. Consulting with a lawyer, save your money. I've got the building's legal team on speed dial, and they eat solo practitioners for breakfast. Not a lawyer, Michael replied quietly, pocketing his phone. Just a colleague. Great. While you're chatting with colleagues, start deciding what furniture you're taking and what you're leaving behind. Anything left after 3 days goes straight to the dumpster. The young couple from 14B finally approached. The woman, Anna, a pediatric surgeon Michael had spoken with in the elevator a few times, cleared her throat. Vincent, is this really necessary? Michael is one of the quietest residents on the floor. Vincent turned his predatory gaze toward them. Dr. Chen, right? You and your husband might want to check your mailbox. Your rent's going up too. His smile was all teeth, though not as drastically if you're smart enough to mind your own business. The threat hung in the air. Anna's husband gently pulled her back toward their apartment. That's how you handle troublemakers, Vincent said, turning back to Michael with renewed aggression. I'm not just evicting you. I'm making an example. Nobody crosses me in this building. Michael took a slow, deep breath. I haven't crossed you, Mr. Hargrove. I've simply been a tenant. A tenant who's overstayed his welcome, Vincent snapped. He stepped forward, jabbing a finger into Michael's chest. I want you gone by Friday, and if you even think about filing some kind of tenant complaint, I'll make sure you never rent in this zip code again. I've got friends in every management company worth mentioning. From the service elevator, Rosa, the head of housekeeping, emerged with her cart. She froze when she saw the confrontation, her eyes widening as they met Michael's. She quickly looked away, but not before Michael caught the subtle shake of her head. A warning. Mr. Hargrove, Michael said, his voice dropping to a new register, one that carried an unexpected authority. I think we should continue this conversation in private. There's nothing to continue, Vincent snarled. I've given you my terms. You're out, end of story, unless you want security to help you pack. He reached for his walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. Marcus, the doorman, suddenly found great interest in the emergency exit sign, studying it with unnatural intensity. Mrs. Abernathy whispered something that sounded like, "Oh, my," and retreated, into her apartment. Michael stood motionless for a moment, then squared his shoulders. The polite smile never left his face, but something shifted in his eyes, a cold calculation replacing his previous forbearance. Before you make that call, Michael said, each word precise and measured, I'd like to verify something. You believe you're acting on behalf of Meridian Investment Group, the owner of this building, correct? Vincent paused, walkie-talkie halfway to his mouth. What's it to you? The Canadian tilted his head slightly, studying Vincent with new intensity. Are you sure about that? Vincent's confidence faltered for just a moment before he recovered with a dismissive laugh. What are you playing at? Of course I'm sure. I've been the authorized property manager for Meridian Park Holdings for 8 years. Meridian Park Holdings, Michael repeated softly. Not Meridian Investment Group? Same difference. Vincent waved his hand impatiently. Corporate restructuring, name changes. Doesn't change who signs my checks or who owns this building. Actually, Michael replied, it changes everything. Vincent's walkie-talkie remained forgotten in his hand as he watched Michael reach into his messenger bag. The hallway had grown so quiet that the soft rustle of papers being withdrawn seemed unnaturally loud. 3 months ago, Michael continued in the same calm voice, North Star Capital, the parent company I represent, acquired Meridian Investment Group's entire Manhattan portfolio in a private equity transaction. He withdrew a leather portfolio and opened it. Including this building. Vincent's face contorted in confusion. That's impossible. I would have been notified. You were, Michael said, extracting a letter bearing Meridian's letterhead. This memorandum went out to all property managers. It explicitly stated that operations would continue as normal during the transition period, with a comprehensive review to follow. He handed the document to Vincent. Perhaps it got lost in your inbox. Vincent snatched the paper, his eyes darting. Across the text, his complexion paled visibly. This doesn't mean anything, he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his uncertainty. You're just some tenant. If North Star bought the building, they'd have sent a real representative, not put someone undercover in an apartment. Michael smiled thinly and produced another document, this one bearing a notarized seal. Michael Kendrick, Senior Operations Director, North Star Capital. He indicated his signature at the bottom of the page, next to the corporate attestation. I wasn't undercover, Mr. Hargrove. I was conducting our standard post-acquisition assessment. Living in the property for 90 days gives us unfiltered insight into management practices, maintenance responsiveness, tenant satisfaction, and any potential issues. The walkie-talkie slipped from Vincent's fingers, clattering on the marble floor. A few residents audibly gasped. Rosa crossed herself quietly from beside her housekeeping cart. So, you're saying... Vincent's voice had lost all its previous bluster. I'm saying, Michael interrupted, closing his portfolio with deliberate precision, that you just tried to evict your employer from his own building. Vincent stumbled backward until he hit the wall, his face a mask of dawning horror. The eviction notice trembled in his hand like a white flag of surrender. Michael stepped forward, adjusting his tie, a small, powerful gesture that seemed to physically diminish Vincent with each inch closed between them. So, Michael said, folding his arms across his chest, let's talk about your future here. Vincent's survival instincts kicked in, his expression morphing from shock to desperate damage control. Mr. Kendrick, there's been a misunderstanding. His voice had risen an octave. I was simply enforcing the previous owner's policies. If I'd known who you were, you would have treated me differently, Michael finished for him. That's precisely the problem. Vincent's eyes darted around the hallway, suddenly aware of their audience. Residents who moments ago had cowered at his approach now watched with poorly concealed satisfaction. Marcus the doorman had abandoned all pretense of disinterest and was openly staring. We should discuss this privately, Vincent suggested, gesturing toward the elevator. In my office, perhaps? You mean my office, Michael corrected. And no, I think here is appropriate. After all, you were comfortable threatening me publicly. Vincent's face flushed crimson. I wouldn't call it threatening. You gave a legally unenforceable eviction notice to the building owner, then threatened to blacklist me with other property management companies if I fought it. Michael consulted his phone. I have the recording. If you'd like to review your exact words. The blood drained from Vincent's face as he realized Michael had been documenting everything. Recording? That's not... You can't. New York is a one-party consent state for recordings, Mr. Hargrove. Another legal detail you seem to have overlooked. Michael turned slightly, addressing the gathered residents. How many of you have received similar threats or arbitrary eviction notices? Hands began to rise hesitantly. Mrs. Abernathy, the young couple from 14B, a college student from the end of the hall, nearly half the floor. Vincent's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. Those were all legitimate business decisions. Decisions made under what authority? Michael asked, his tone still conversational but edged with steel. Because our acquisition agreement specified no changes to existing lease terms without corporate approval. I have discretionary authority to violate rent stabilization laws, to threaten tenants, to create a hostile living environment. Michael tapped the portfolio against his palm. Our legal team will be fascinated by your interpretation of discretionary authority. Vincent's shoulders slumped as reality crashed down on him. Look, this is all a huge misunderstanding. I was just trying to maximize property value for the owners. By breaking the law, Michael raised an eyebrow. Interesting strategy. Rosa stepped forward, clutching her cleaning rag. He make us clean his personal apartment for free, she said quietly. Tell us we lose job if we don't. Vincent's face contorted. That's a lie. You can't honestly believe the cleaning staff over. Michael tilted his head. You didn't really think you could kick out the owner, did you? Vincent's face cycled through emotions. Disbelief, anger, calculation, and, finally, a desperate attempt at salvaging his position. Mr. Kendrick, I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot here. Let me explain my management philosophy. Your management philosophy appears to involve intimidation, legal violations, and abuse of power. Michaels replied, checking his watch. I think I've seen enough. Everyone makes mistakes, Vincent pleaded, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But I know this building better than anyone. The maintenance issues, the tenant histories, the vendor relationships. You need someone like me during this transition. Michael studied him with clinical detachment. What I need, Mr. Hargrove, is a property manager who understands that tenant satisfaction drives property value, not the other way around. He gestured to Mrs. Abernathy, who clutched her cardigan with trembling hands. When was the last time? Your heat worked properly, ma'am? 3 winters, she replied softly. Vincent said repairs weren't cost-effective for tenants my age. The young doctor, Anna, stepped forward. He doubled our parking fee overnight. When we questioned it, he suggested we might find our car repeatedly ticketed if we complained. Marcus, emboldened by the shift in power, joined in. He makes us clock out for mandated breaks but expects us to remain on property and available. Michael nodded, taking mental notes as more residents shared their experiences. Vincent's face grew increasingly ashen with each revelation. Wait! Vincent held up his hands defensively. These people are exaggerating. Every building has complainers. I've kept this place profitable. That's what matters to investors. North Star's investment philosophy prioritizes sustainability and ethical management, Michael replied. Short-term profits at the expense of legal compliance and reputation aren't in our playbook. Vincent's desperate smile faltered. I can adapt. New management, new approach. Just tell me what you want. What I want, Michael said, his voice carrying effortlessly down the hallway, is for you to clear out your office, immediately. Vincent's face hardened. You can't do that. I have a contract. A contract you violated repeatedly, Michael countered, holding up his phone. I've documented at least 17 actionable breaches in just 3 months. Our legal team could keep you tied up in court for years, Mr. Hargrove. Vincent's eyes narrowed as he made one final play. I'll sue for wrongful termination. I know things about this building. Maintenance corners cut before your time. Inspection reports buried. Michael's expression didn't change, but something deadly serious filled his eyes. Are you attempting to blackmail me, Mr. Hargrove? Because that would be unwise. The silence in the hallway was absolute as the 2 men locked eyes. Vincent's gaze faltered first. Pack your things, the Canadian said. You've got until the end of the day. Vincent stood frozen for several seconds like a chess player who suddenly realizes checkmate is inevitable. The hallway remained silent, everyone holding their breath to see his next move. Fine, he spat finally, snatching his walkie-talkie from the floor. But don't think this is over. My brother-in-law is a partner at Rosenberg and Klein. You'll be hearing from him? Michael raised an eyebrow. You mean the law firm that handles North Star's commercial acquisitions? I'm sure they'd be fascinated by this conversation." Vincent's threat withered on his lips. He turned to the residents, jabbing, a finger toward them. "And don't think I won't remember each of your faces. This city's smaller than you think. Mr. Hargrove," Michael's voice had turned to ice, "are you threatening the tenants of this building? Again? In front of me?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because that would give me cause to call security and have you escorted out, immediately, rather than allowing you the dignity of packing your own belongings." Vincent's face contorted, but self-preservation finally won out. Without another word, he turned and stormed toward the elevator, repeatedly jamming the call button with his finger. As the elevator doors closed on Vincent's furious face, the hallway remained silent for a beat before erupting into murmurs. Michael turned to address the gathered residents, his diplomatic demeanor returning. "I apologize for the disruption," he said, "and, more importantly, for the environment that's apparently been fostered here." Mrs. Abernathy approached timidly. "Does this mean we can stay? He told me last week I'd need to find somewhere else by summer." "Your lease remains exactly as written, Mrs. Abernathy," Michael assured her. "No one will be forced out." Marcus stepped forward, removing his uniform cap. "Sir, there are other issues in the building that need attention. Maintenance problems that have been ignored. Security protocols that have been compromised." Michael nodded. "I'll need a full accounting. Can you gather the staff in the main conference room in an hour?" "Absolutely, sir." Marcus straightened, his posture, a new energy in his movements. Anna from 14B approached next. "What happens now? With management, I mean." Michael smiled, the expression genuine for the first time since he'd arrived home. "First, I'll need to review the building operations. North Star typically brings in a transitional management team during ownership changes." He checked his watch. "They should be here within the hour." Rosa hesitantly stepped forward. "And our jobs? We are safe?" "More than safe," Michael assured her. "We'll be conducting a full review of employment practices, wages, and working conditions." As the residents dispersed, Michael caught snippets of their whispered conversations. Relief, vindication, and a new sense of security. He turned toward the direction Vincent had departed, his expression resolute. "Starting today," the Canadian said, "this building is under new management. Mine." Vincent Hargrove's world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. The property manager stuffed personal items into a cardboard box, his movements erratic and desperate. Photos of himself with minor celebrities at charity galas, awards from the New York Property Management Association. The crystal paperweight. He'd purchased himself but told everyone was a gift from a grateful tenant. In the lobby below, residents gathered in small clusters, the news spreading like wildfire through the building. The tyrant was falling. The king was dead. "I heard he tried to evict the actual owner," whispered a resident from the 8th floor. "I heard the Canadian guy recorded everything," added another. "Vincent's finished in this business." Vincent emerged from the elevator clutching his hastily packed box, his $1,000 shoes clicking against the marble floor. The lobby fell silent as he passed, dozens of eyes tracking his retreat. No one offered to help with the door. Outside, the New York evening was settling in, the city lights beginning to sparkle against the encroaching darkness. Vincent placed his box on a bench while fishing for his phone, unaware of Michael watching. From the lobby doorway, Marcus approached Michael, standing at a respectful distance. "Sir, the staff is assembling as requested, and the North Star transition team just called. They'll be here in 20 minutes. "Thank you, Marcus." Michael nodded, his eyes still on Vincent's diminished figure on the sidewalk. "Tell me, how long?" "Have you worked here?" 7 years, sir. Started as night security before Vincent demoted me to doorman when I reported safety violations." Michael turned to face him. "Would you be interested in interim building manager duties while we restructure?" Marcus's eyes widened. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Good. We'll discuss it in the meeting. Michael gestured toward Vincent. Give me a moment, would you? He stepped outside, the cool evening air carrying the symphony of city sounds. Traffic, distant sirens, the murmur of pedestrians. Vincent was arguing with someone on his phone, his voice strained. What do you mean, my security deposit? No, I've been there for 5 years. You can't just... He turned and saw Michael, quickly ending his call. Trouble? Michael asked mildly. Vincent's jaw tightened. My landlord is raising my rent by 40%. Says it's market adjustment. Sound familiar? Karma works quickly in New York, Michael observed, though I suspect it has more to do with your reputation preceding you. Vincent struggled to maintain his composure. You've made your point. You won. Is there something else you want? Michael considered him thoughtfully. Just curious, did you ever stop to consider the people behind the leases? The lives you were disrupting? It's business, Vincent said flatly. Nothing personal. I believe that's where we differ, Michael replied. Everything about home is personal. He turned back toward the building, his building, with its gleaming facade and warm lights welcoming residents home. Vincent watched him go, clutching his box of meaningless trophies. Suddenly, just another person without connections or power, in a city that devoured the vulnerable. Michael paused at the entrance, looking back over his shoulder. Turns out, I wasn't the one who needed to pack their bags after all.